It's Rod with the PhotoFair coming back at you with another video. Today I'm going to talk about a brand new lens that was just released by Canon, and I'm excited about it. I pre-ordered it and was able to get one in the first batch. Got it at Pro Photo Supply in Portland. I was the first guy on the list, so I was guaranteed to get one with the first batch, and I did. It is the 14-35 L. This is the lens I've been waiting for, and I'd like to share a little bit about it with you today. Many of you may know that watch these videos regularly that I'm a real estate agent by profession, and that's really how I earn a living. The PhotoFair is kind of a hobby for me, and I love photography and so on and so forth, and I do shoot my own real estate photos, and the 14-35 seemed like a good fit. So I've always had an ultra-wide-angle lens in my kit. When I first got into the 5D series cameras, I had a 17-40 L. That was a good lens. Nothing wrong with that lens at all. They still sell that lens new. I upgraded from that lens to the 16-35 f4 IS. I was more concerned with the image stabilization aspect than I was the extra f2.8 speed. And the 16-35 f4 ISL was reputed to be Canon's sharpest and highest optical quality lens they had ever made in the wide, super wide category. So I liked that. I liked the optical quality. Those early 2.8 versions of the 16-35 were a little subpar, particularly compared to competition coming from Nikon and later Sony. Canon eventually got down to making a really good 2.8 ultra wide. When I switched to the EOS R system, I was genuinely tempted by the 15-35 2.8 L IS lens, because you got both the 2.8 speed and the image stabilization. So that was a first for Canon. You didn't have to choose between IS and the fast 2.8 aperture. The lens is about $2,300, and again, I don't feel like I'm going to use the lens at 2.8 for my application. I typically shoot it at 5.6 or f8. Occasionally the 2.8 might be nice for me. So I kind of just stuck with my 16-35 IS with the adapter on the R, and it worked great. I got lots of fabulous pictures. When Canon announced this lens, though, I got kind of excited. Look how small this thing is. I mean, it's a tiny lens. It's lightweight. It is physically smaller, significantly smaller, and a little bit lighter than the 16-35 f4 IS, and I don't have to use the adapter, which makes it even more smaller on an EOS R camera. It has image stabilization, very impressive image stabilization. Canon says this lens is good for 5.5 stops, and then on the R5 or R6 cameras, it's good for 7.5 stops. So I found the hand holdability of this lens to be brilliant. Overall, I'm super impressed with the lens. There are a couple quirks that hopefully we'll maybe get a firmware update to fix. I want to first talk about the image quality with this lens. I think we're just working under the assumption that everyone knows that L-series lenses are built with pretty nice. It's a nicely made lens, very similar to any of the other L-series lenses that you've used in the past. It's got that build quality. It's got the moisture protection, the gasket on the back, and all the best coatings and Canon's best glass, all that. We can just work under the assumption it's a good, solid, nicely made lens, and it is. So when it gets to image quality, I'm very impressed. It's razor sharp in the center, at basically throughout the whole range. And it's also sharp out on the corners, which is amazing, because typically these wide-angle lenses lose a lot of resolution out towards the corners. This one, not so much. Where the lens has got a couple of shortcomings is on distortion. So the barrel distortion is pretty aggressive on this lens. You'll see, I'll show some photos. And right now there isn't a profile set up for it in Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom. That will no doubt come in the next few months. And barrel distortion is an easy correction in Photoshop, especially when there's a proper lens profile set up for the lens. But for now, I have to manually correct that barrel distortion. At 14, it is, can't sugarcoat it, it's severe. So that's a minor complaint right now, but it is kind of affecting my workflow right now. The other thing that I think is going to need a firmware update, I hope, is that if you shoot this lens and you're like on a tripod and you go to 14, it's got typical average vignetting for a ultra wide lens. It's impressive, actually. You lose, probably up to 2 stops out towards the corners, but that's normal. You're always going to have vignetting, and it's an easy fix in Lightroom or Photoshop, even without the lens profile. That one's not hard to fix. The problem is if you're hand holding the lens and you're kind of shaky, which that's my Achilles heel in photography, which is why I love image stabilization so much. This lens vignettes severely, like to the point where it's not correctable if there's a lot of camera shake, if there's a lot of image stabilization adjustment. Now, my opinion on that is that Canon, because they have that big 54mm lens mount, they were able to make their IBIS system really move around. That's how they're getting these impressive numbers for 8 stops and 7 stops of correction. The problem is this 14 to 35, at 14, you are right on the edge of the image circle. There is no room to move the sensor around without popping the corners out of the image circle. That's my opinion. I don't know that for a fact, but the vignetting is so hard that it's, in cases, some cases, it's not correctable. So I'm hoping they're going to come up with a firmware update for either the lens or the camera that kind of says, hey, with this lens, reduce that stabilization. It's probably on the image sensor, the IBIS stabilizer that's causing the problem, not the in-lens. I no longer have an EOS R, so I can't really test that theory. But it only vignetted hard like that when I was hand holding the camera at an awkward angle or something where clearly there was probably some camera shake it was correcting for, and on shots where I dragged the shutter a little. So that there is that, and that will be, so you want to be very careful about that with this lens. And that's really my only complaint about this lens, is that that hard vignette when in those camera shake situations where IBIS is making a correction. So Canon's usually pretty Johnny on the spot with this. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a firmware update for this lens in the next couple of months. And if they remedy that problem, it's a near perfect lens. At that, once I get a profile for Photoshop and Lightroom for the barrel distortion, just a general lens correction profile, and a firmware update to make the IBIS work a little better with this particular lens, holy mackerel, it's a real winner. So a couple of things about it. Number one, 14mm lens, no big bulbous front element, normal shade. It's not a deep shade, and you can't have a deep shade at 14. Okay, but it's a normal lens. I can put 77mm filters on here. The same size filters I used on my 16 to 35, I can use on this lens, but it's a 14. And friends, I don't know how you guys feel about ultra wide, but a lot of people don't realize that down in this focal range, the difference between 1mm is huge. It's not just, oh, it's a millimeter. It's not like the difference between 35 and 36, which you might not even be able to see with your eye, but the difference between 15 and 16 is reasonably dramatic, and the difference between 14 and 16 is rather dramatic, and it's a lot of extra coverage. So I'm real happy being able to have a compact, small 14 to 35 lens with image stabilization. It's an f4. It takes a regular filter, and it's lightweight, fits in the palm of my hand. It's just a win-win-win all around. Okay, and the 2 gripes I have about the lens are going to get resolved. I'm highly confident because Canon's had these issues before, and they're pretty good at getting them corrected. So a couple other things about this lens that make it really special. Number one, this lens will focus down to it's officially 8 inches, but remember, they measure that from the sensor to the subject, not from the front of the lens. So you literally can have stuff practically touching the lens element, and it's sharp. That's impressive. At 35 millimeter, that gives you a macro reproduction ratio of 0.38x. That's nearly half life size. That's impressive. At 14, of course, your magnification ratio is a little less because it's a wider perspective. But you can get some beautiful shots. I mean, look at some of these shots. This is a spectacular lens. It's sharp. It's clear right out to the corners. Once you get beyond the barrel distortion and the occasional IBIS-related vignetting, it's a solid lens. I highly recommend it. I'm glad I waited for this one instead of forking over $2,300 for the 2.8 15-35, which, by the way, is a legendary lens already. I mean, that lens, everyone who has reviewed that lens loves it. But for me, I'd rather pocket the $700. This one was $1,699, whereas the 2.8 15-35 is $2,300. So that's a big chunk of difference, and I'm actually getting something. I'm not just trading lens speed for dollars. I actually gain something. 14 versus 15. I mean, that is real. That's tangible. So it's kind of nice. I almost feel bad for the person, you know, that's got to decide between, do I want to give up the speed now for the extra wide angle? So Canon really hit a home run with this. It crushes that 16-35. It's worth every penny. Now, if you can't afford that, I get that. Canon still sells the 16-35 f4 IS for $1,100. I've got mine up on eBay for sale right now. It's in pretty doggone good shape for $800. So sometimes, yeah, I get it. These L lenses are expensive. It was expensive for me. I make a good living, but I crunch the numbers. Do I really want to spend the money on that? And in this case, I saw the value, and I still see the value today. So great lens. It's spectacular. Canon hit a home run with this, and just wanted to share all that with you guys. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the PhotoFair or at other shows in and around the United States. And we'll see you next time right here at PhotoFair and YouTube.
Thank you.